reading. I was raised in Surrey, British Columbia, and was fortunate to be born to two amazing parents. My dad worked full-time downtown Vancouver, and my mom stayed home. I was nurtured throughout my childhood in an environment where curiosity was encouraged, hard work expected, and above all, compassion for others underscored daily life. One of my most favorite outings when I was a kid was when my mom would take me into town in her powder blue Volkswagen Rabbit to the Woodwards at 128 West Cordova. We would go to $1.49 days, and at Christmas would head down to look at the display window and visit the food floor. And after the 1980s, it wasn't until I was sworn in as a constable with the Vancouver Police Department in '99 that I returned to the area. What I found wasn't anything like my childhood memories of Vancouver. There appeared to be people suffering, living in deplorable conditions that I would never have imagined existed in Canada. And as it turned out, my first stop as a recruit was walking the beat in the Downtown Eastside. My field trainer was an old school cop who firmly held the belief that anyone in possession of illicit drugs for whatever purpose should be taken to jail and charged. People who are mentally ill and a danger to themselves or others went straight to hospital. I ended up doing 3 tours of duty in the Downtown Eastside, once as a recruit, once as a constable, and once as a sergeant. And it was during my time here that my opinions on drug use and mental illness started to evolve. As I learned of people's individual journeys, it was apparent to me that care and compassion was required, not enforcement. In 2003, my partner and I were responsible for the block that included the 139 East Hastings when North America's first safe injection site opened. This was an important shift in thinking for many police officers, many of whom had spent their entire careers enforcing drug policy. I quickly came to some conclusions about drug use. Severe addiction to street drugs and the need for those drugs outstripped almost everything, and the only people who were profiting from the illicit drug trade were the producers and distributors. Another common experience was that my partner and I would often come across people who were in mental health crisis that required us to apprehend them under the Mental Health Act because they were a danger to themselves or others. And I came quickly to understand that the threshold, the bar for that, was very high in the city of Vancouver. We would take a person to hospital, wait sometimes for several hours for them to be seen by a doctor, and then watch in dismay as they walked out of the parking lot before we even left. I realized that for a small group of people, we were often doing this several times in a 12-hour shift. In some cases, after repeated trips to emerge in an attempt to get a person mental health treatment, only to see them being released over and over again, that individual would end up in jail. And I realized that we were criminalizing people because of their mental illness. And I never felt like we were doing the right thing in those situations. I became a police officer to help people, and yet so often I felt like I was doing exactly the opposite. So when I was asked to look into the volume of calls for police that involved a person in mental health crisis, I felt compelled to take on the project. And we found that in some areas of our city, over 50% of calls for police involved someone who was in mental health crisis. And so we advocated for change, for an increase in capacity, for enough resources in our health system so that we could take people to a place where they could receive immediate assistance, for health to fully utilize the provisions of the Mental Health Act. And we had some success. We drew attention to the fact that police had become de facto mental health workers, that we were, in some cases, criminalizing people to keep them from hurting themselves or others. We highlighted the story of Corey O'Brien to illustrate the consequences of a system that was too overwhelmed. As a police agency, we invested heavily in the mental health unit, where we partnered with health providers to respond to people in community to ultimately reduce their contact with the criminal justice system. But the demand totally outstripped the resources. And then in 2016, the provincial health officer declared a public health emergency because we saw an alarming number of people dying from illicit drug toxicity. Since then, the situation has only got worse. In 2021 in Vancouver, we had 527 deaths. 10 people are dying each week in Vancouver. Our members start to carry naloxone kits because it was so common that they were coming across people who were overdosing. Dealers started handing out the kits to their customers because they started to lose so many of them to overdose deaths. My hope for healthcare is treatment on demand, robust, safe supply, and a clear path to decriminalizing illicit drugs in this country, to educate young people about drug use, get people help when they ask, keep them safe if they continue to choose repeated drug use, and recognize that this is a health matter, not a criminal one. My hope for healthcare is a place where doctors and nurses and housing representatives and mental health workers and various social service providers can come together and figure out the upstream drivers, what is causing a person to come into contact with police. My hope for healthcare is a system where people's rights and autonomy are respected, where loved ones can play a role in healing when appropriate, where people like Corey O'Brien don't ever fall through the cracks. My hope for healthcare is a system where police don't have to carry naloxone, where we don't have to advise yet another family that their loved one has died due to illicit drug toxicity, where calls involving people who are in mental health crisis are dramatically reduced, where people who want help can get it, and those who don't can still live in peace and dignity.